Sorry, sweet. I see 21 of y'all in here. Okay, so since we're now recording, we are live. That means you guys' phones need to be zipped into your bags just for the time being. It's a short Zoom. I promise you can handle it. We're going to be talking about how you can set up Display Flex. And it's one of the easiest ways to outline and section a page so that you don't have all of the annoying interactions with stuff crossing over one another or not referencing one another in a weird way. It's a really easy way to get around that. And there's two key parts. There's containers and then children within the containers, or not children necessarily, but nesting. It's a very nesting focused set of CSS. So there's just a little bit of setup we have to do, but it pays off really well, sticking with that idea of source coding and stuff like that. So I just want to clear up before we begin here that Display Flex is a little bit different from Flexbox. We got to start with Display Flex to kind of see how it works and get a vibe for it before we get into Flexbox, which is just a little bit more configuration and a little bit more specifics. We'll talk about some use cases. There's a video in the agenda today talking about that. How to set it up is what we're doing, how to apply it, whatever. And then after we finish up this Flexbox, it's a work time on 4.7.3, filling in your relevant details. Depending on where you guys are at the end of the day, I don't know if that'll be due Friday or maybe Monday or Wednesday. I don't know yet. We'll figure it out. But our goal for the day is to apply Display Flex to organize our web pages more responsibly. So Display Flex always starts with a container and a little bit of CSS. So if I go into my VS Code here, you are welcome to follow along with me, but remember this is being recorded, so you can either watch on your Zoom and then check it out later, kind of like taking notes, but it still helps to actually see it work and ask the questions in class. Anyway, so I need to make a quick folder because I only have first periods right now. So if we go into here, make sure your OneDrives are still syncing. I know it defaults pretty well, but it never hurts to check. Okay, so I'm just making a P2, not Felx. I want Flex. Okay, so then I'm going to open up that folder in VS Code, just like normal. We're going to go into second period, Flex. I'm just going to make a quick index and a quick style sheet so that I can show you the setup of stuff here. So styles.css. And in order to make the quick files, I need to make a subfolder for my style sheet. In order to make the quick files, you can just double click in the big rectangle and it will pop up with that autofill situation here. So I'm just gonna move that. Yep, normal setup, HTML5, stuff we've been doing, stuff you're sick of me hearing. I know that. So one thing I do want to show you though is if you want to increase your efficiency and decrease some of the boring typing busy work that you do, instead of typing the whole LINK for Zelda link and then the href or whatever, you can just go to the line you want to add it to and type the word link and then hit enter. It's going to auto-populate with that REL style sheet and that href quote box so that you can skip some of those steps and get your thing configured a little bit faster. It doesn't work unless you add that final type equals text / CSS for some reason, but that is a quick way to get the big three required for a style sheet linked real quick. All right, so the way we've been kind of doing our websites as of lately is by creating these divs. So here's, let's call it section 1. All of these block level elements, you can also just type div and enter, and then that's going to auto add the start and end tags. Go section 2, right? This is stuff that we're used to. I have autosave turned on, so I'm just going to go live real quick and then pop this open. 1 second. Yep, there we go. Okay, so we have our normal divs, just making block level long, maximizing their available space, dependent on the viewport, which is another term for the browser window, kind of like on a ship or like a submarine. Think about it like the viewport into the outside. In this case, it's our viewport into the HTML. And the reason I say viewport is it's important to when we get into our containers and stuff like that. So with this, though, if I have a bunch of divs that if I start styling them, let's say we have some width and heights of like 1,000 pixels, like something, oh, that's 100, like something pretty dramatic. Go into here, HEIGHT, 1000 px. pretty large divs. I'm gonna add a border as well so that you can see what they're working with here. We need 3 pieces of a border. You need a width, you need a style, which is how it looks, and then a color, which applies that style. Okay, so if we look at our output, which has vanished, of course. Let me fix that real quick, sorry. There we go. So now we have section 1, section 2. If I tried to make these get next to each other, it's kind of a pain in the butt to make them interact with one another in a way that's not the most frustrating. So what you can do is take advantage of display flex. So if you imagine section 1 is for, I don't know, restaurants. If this was my restaurant page for my travel site, restaurant Rex. Section 1 will be restaurants. Section 2 will be pictures of the restaurants. Pictures of restaurants. We have these sections wanting to interact with one another, but they're not lining up the way that I want them to as according to my wireframe. So what I can do though, is I can create a flex box around, or a flex display around these 2 sections and then determine their size with a little bit of CSS. What you got to do first though, because you already have our existing div sections, is we need to contain them inside of a parent. And to do that, we're going to do another div around the outside. I'm going to go div class equals, call this something that relates to its function, like flex container. And then when I hit enter, it didn't do what I wanted to. Just kidding. We'll do it the old-fashioned way. So div enter. I'm going to go arrow key in and then set a class equal to flex container. CSS does not love spaces, so I just do the capitals to separate it. I'm going to highlight this end tag, Control X to cut it, hit enter, Control V. Now my nesting is all off though, because we want this div class of flex container to be the parent of our flex children. So we're going to hit tab here, highlight these 2 sections, whatever sections you're trying to nest, you can hit tab on those and it's going to move them over instead of deleting them. So now I have a nice little flex container and some divs inside of there. And if I go to my output, nothing's changed. It's still behaving the same way that it did initially, except now you can see that flex container. See how this border is twice as thick as this one? It's because this is our flex container, which is overlapping our flex child in there. So I'm going to go in here, take this border attribute off, just click on that, control question mark, that quick comments it out, and that will give us just these 2 sections taking up their 1,000 pixels each. So the first thing you want to do is set the rule for the flex container to have that display of flex, which is what determines how these pieces interact with one another. And to do that, display and set it to flex, this third option right here. There's 2 more really important pieces of information that you need while you're establishing the container. It's something called viewport height and viewport width. It's going to scale a little bit differently than percentages that we're used to, but it is going to make it take up all of your available screen space, which is important when we start adjusting the size of the things later on. So to do that, it's the same width and height, but instead of setting it to 100%, we're going to set it to 100 VW. VW stands for viewport width. Like for example, my viewport, my monitor right here is like 800 pixels wide or something. So my viewport width is 800 px when it's full screen. You can see something's already starting to change with restaurants and pictures of restaurants. So, but when I resize my viewport or I make my window smaller, it's less than 800 pixels because it's not taking up my entire screen. Right now, it's probably something like 600 pixels if I had to estimate. So viewport width is just going to take up that, make that flex container take up 100% of the available window size as compared to the available screen size. And it's just something that makes your pages a little bit easier to work with and arrange before we start getting into anything crazy. You can do the exact same thing for viewport height, which we're going to do here. Set the height to 100 VH. And that is our div flex container, which is going to help us arrange all of our pieces like restaurants and pictures. You can see already it's making that 2-column setup. By setting our div CSS for the flex container to be display flex and take up 100% of the available horizontal width and vertical width, we can start arranging our pieces within. So I know that was a lot of steps. I did go a little bit fast, but I will help you guys with this on as I kind of wander around today. So that's the first half of using display flex, is setting up the container to actually flex around. Okay, so now what we need to do is do a little bit of CSS on the flex children, the nested elements within. You can do this as a div and then have regular HTML elements inside that div, or you can assign every element inside of the container some flex class so that it interacts well with this container we've just built. But I'm going to do the former, the first one, and set each of these div classes to be something specific to their function. So if this is a restaurant explanation, it's probably going to be something text-based. So I'm going to call this one something like flex text. And then same thing down here, same rule applies. You want the name to reflect its function. If this is for images, this is going to be flex images. And now I have two more pieces of customizable CSS that I can adjust the size based on this container that I've built here. So what that means, or what it means, or sorry, not what it means. But what we do now is go into some more CSS for div.flexText. Highlight all three of these lines because we've already written them. Control C, enter, Control V, and change the phrase text to be images. And now I have two containers of how I can adjust the viewport available space inside of my container. And this will make sense here in just a second. So right now, by default, each of these elements are going to either divide the available space or take up the entire line that they want to occupy. They're going to default to a certain sizing and shaping. We can adjust that now that we have the flex classes assigned to each, and we want our viewport width or our viewport height numbers to add up to 100% because that's the available space that we have here. So let's say you want your text to take up 70% of the viewport and your images to take up 30% of the viewport. So what you'll do is you'll assign a width to each of those, depending on how big you want them. Like text, we want 70 VW, because remember that number is the percentage of the viewport width. The container is separate. It's just taking up all of the available space to nest these pieces within or divide these pieces within. We're going to do the same thing down here to images and set it to 30 VW. So that these two numbers add up to 100%. So if I go in here and I add a quick border, I'm going to take the border that I've already written, Control C, hit enter, Control V. It's still commented out, but I can quick uncomment it. Highlight this line, Control question mark, and same thing here, Control question mark, but I'm going to make this one, we're going to make it red so it's a little bit easier to see. Okay, to recap, we have our container. Nested within it, two children. The container is taking up all of the available space, and we're using the width and the viewport width properties and values to divide that space equally up to 100%. So if I go to my output, you'll see that section 1 restaurants takes up 70% of my available space. Section 2 pictures takes up 30% of my available space, all contained within my div flex container. So if I resize, you can see that they're going to adjust accordingly. And they're going to maintain as best they can that 70-30 ratio. And you can change that. You can adjust this as you need. Let's say we want a little more room for the picture, a little less room for the text. Let's go down 60-40. Right? You could do this numerically by numerically. It's not going to make a huge difference here, but you can see that the red pictures of rest is a little bit larger than it was before. Yeah, Juanito, what's up?
You look on like the left side of the page.
This one?
Still like space.
Still a little bit of room right here.
Why is there still space if it's taking like a photo of 100%?
That's just something to do with the HTML. There's ways to undo it, but it's kind of manual. It's also just kind of nice to have a little bit of a border. You can take it off, but it's not incorrect if you leave it there. But yeah, it's just the way that the HTML pieces interact. So the other cool part about flex boxes, if I have a, let's go something like this, make my div container a little bit more obvious for each of these. I don't have a picture ready to go, but I can add more HTML elements like a paragraph, right? Let's do a quick unordered list just by typing UL, enter, LI, enter, and then we'll go list 1. Highlight that pre-configured line, Control C, enter, Control V, Control V, Control V, get a couple of those in there. Actually going to take we'll go manual. I'm combining both of them. That is only going to stay contained within this paragraph section. So if I had really long list items, they'd be flexing around the available space in here. So like, for example, let's do that real quick. Instead of just calling it lifts 1, let's put some lorem in there. Control S, move my captions real quick so I have my scroll bar. I've already done the work on that line, so I don't need to write it all again. Control V, Control V, Control V. Just imagine I have some super long or unordered list portions. Those are going to stay contained within their flex box or their flex zone. See how they're all remaining in that section 1 of restaurants. Pictures of restaurants, when I hit, well, it's not small enough, but you can see it's going to all stay contained within these separate sections. So now that we've configured this kind of parent-child ancestor descendant relationship, I can copy this whole section. Say you have 3 different restaurants, 3 different pictures. Copy and paste that 3 times. It's going to, there's a teeny bit of overlap, but that's okay, because my monitor is a weird size. But we have now 3 different sections that are going to flex accordingly and adjust accordingly based on the user's viewport. You could even go in here and adjust the order. Let's say I want my images to flip-flop. So we got right here. Guys, I see some phones out while we're live. Can you zip those away, please? You can take your flex images. Let's cut this and put it above the flex text. And it's going to maintain that same ratio. We go here. If you wanted some alternation, like these 2 are going to alternate. There's a little bit of overlap, so just bear with it. I think it's actually because of this. Here, let's take that off. 1 sec. There we go. Mine's being mean. I'm just commenting out this div rule that I set that's, I think, messing with some of my sizing. There we go. So you can see by just copying and pasting these containers, I have a really nicely laid out website that is going to respond appropriately to whatever size device my user has, which is just a really interesting and cool way to kind of begin using Flex so that you don't have to manually arrange all of your divs, all of your images. You can just quickly copy and paste them by using just a teeny bit of CSS and a parent and child Flex relationship. But you might be asking real quick, how can you apply this to some pre-existing code? So if I open up my source code for 4.7.3, that folder that we copied earlier this week, we have all of this existing HTML that I don't want to undo. I don't want to start over. That's a ton of work and I don't want to do it. What I can do though, is I can start by, let's say, going underneath my nav is typically in my experience where I put it, because I want my nav removed from my Flexbox so that it's kind of separate, taking advantage of Park. I would do my div, set the class equal to flex container, something like that. You can call it whatever you want, but just remember, it's going to be harder to understand when you reopen it later. Take that end tag, Control X. Let's say we want just these 3 containers contained into one section of my site. Control V to paste that down here. And we got a little bit of weird nesting going on. The first thing you need to check and make sure your nesting is good on is the main container, the parent display flex container. I'm going to highlight everything within all of my children of my flex container, hit tab, and now I know they relate to this flex container object right here. So go into my style sheet, div.container. I'm just going to ignore those for now. I'm going to comment these out so that they don't create an issue. Okay, cool. So it's just borders and background colors. I'm also going to take the body background color off because it's ugly. Okay, so we have div.flex container. And we just need to set the display to be flex and the width and height to both be 100 of their specific viewport width, viewport height. So we'll go 100 VW for viewport width. Did I spell that right? Yeah, okay. And then height, 100 VH for viewport height. And now we have a flex container happening. Make sure we're all good here. My CSS is mad. Oh, it doesn't like this. Okay. Okay, that should be better. All right, so now I should have lost my output. Yes, okay, so we'll close this. We'll go live on this previously existing, excuse me, previous existing code. Now that we have a flex container, I just need to assign a little bit of viewport width and viewport height to the children. But you can see already there's some interaction happening with the pieces that I've already established. And they are lining up with one another, all inside of these little sections, these little sandboxes that you can experiment with by going into your style sheet. And as right now, let's see, we have just div classes of container. we want these three, since we have three divs of the same class, to take up 30% of the available viewport width, I'm gonna go into that one CSS. It's gonna cascade over all the available spaces, set the width to 30%. We'll go 33, just so it kind of adds up to 99. Okay, so now the width is set to 33% of the viewport. And if I go back to my output, it should be sharing equally in a 3-column setup. And all I had to do to my existing code was add a flex container div, nest a little bit over, and then in the CSS, add some viewport width and viewport height. It is a surprisingly simple setup. You just have to do a little bit of tweaking and adjusting to make sure it's getting the output that you desire. But it is a pretty cool little system that I really enjoy using. And it's a lot less frustrating than previously attempted stuff. Before I help you guys one-on-one wander around, I'm going to close the Zoom room here shortly. We'll go off the air. You'll have your work time. Does anybody have any questions about the setup, about how Flexbox works, about how anything like that? Yes, Juanita.
What if you want space between the boxes?
Then you could adjust the padding on the boxes and it will spread out the boxes from one another, but they'll still remain contained in that parent container. And then it will still take up the available space, ignoring the padding. So say you have 30, 30, 30, that's only 90. And then you can have padding of 2, and that'll equal what? 96 or something. And it's granular, but it does the math for you. So. Okay, the last thing I want to show y'all before we close up the Zoom room, if I go to today's agenda, you can see that there is a video about some Flexbox design patterns, different ones that are really common in typical web design, taking advantage of this display flex and this viewport width, viewport height, stuff like that. And there's also this CSS Flex Playground. So this is a super useful code pen that I found that hopefully it decides to load. But it outlines all of the different aspects and things that you can change about the properties of the Flex container. So this one on the left is all going to be related to Flex container. And these properties on the right are all related to Flex items. These are the children of the Flex container. We'll get more into Flexbox shortly, but this is kind of our brief introduction to how it works. You can check out and click around. It's interactive, like the wrap. You know, wrap is a useful one that you will experiment with in the initial stages. This is our available space. The white line is our container, and then 1 through 5 are the children. By default, there's no wrap, so they're just going to divide the space up equally. But if you wrap it, they're going to take up their available space and move in order. Or if you wrap reverse, it's going to go 1, 2, 3. It's a little confusing, but this CSS Flexbox Playground is a super cool reference, a super cool way to kind of see how the pieces work as we keep revisiting and start to understand using Flex instead of hard coding, which is like position absolute and stuff like that in the future. So these resources are available in the agenda for the day. There's some extra resources applying it to existing code. You guys, this is optional. You don't have to do this at all. You can just stick to what's comfortable for this project. But if it's something that's been frustrating you or something that you want to give a shot, this is a great place to start. Bless you. Any questions before I close up our Zoom room? Yeah, Chris, what's up? Okay, no worries. I'll help. Okay, so I'm gonna end this, upload the video, attach it to the agenda. I'm also gonna upload my zip file of the example for your guys' period. So you guys have that to reference if you'd like as well. You'll have plenty of tools at your disposal. For the rest of the period, we'll just keep working on 4.7.3, trying to finish that up as soon as possible. Sound good? Any questions? Okay, sweet. We're going off the air. You can be back on your phones, even though I know you guys had them out anyway. So.